Hello, everyone. My name is James Williams. I'm the Director of Programs with global neutral trade body, the Mobile Ecosystem Forum. We've been around for 21 years, and I'm just going to give 30 seconds, a minute or so, because I know a good number of you are coming in now. I can see the number of participants at the bottom of the screen increasing every second. So let's just leave it a few seconds, but a very, very warm welcome. It is Thursday, the 28th of April, 3 p.m. UK time, which is a typical standard time for MEF webinars. Those of you joining us for the first time, a particularly warm welcome to you. MEF, we typically have about 2, sometimes 3 live webinars. They almost always take part on a Thursday, covering a huge variety of topics. In MEF, we have 6 product areas, and a real big one for us is the whole area of enterprise communication, so business messaging. Business messaging has moved on such a lot. I've been in the industry a long time, and indeed, my panelists today, some of them have been in the industry a very, very long time too. And the days of business messaging being just one way, so-called bulk SMS, have changed demonstrably over time. And today it's all about conversational messaging, that's two-way messaging, and the word rich pops up all the time. Today's topic, it's Rich Communication Services, RCS. And when you are looking to deploy any service or any new mobile digital channel out there, of course the technology is important. That will no doubt be touched upon by my speakers today. But beyond just the technology, the whole commercial model is critical to get right to ensure adoption goes the way it should. There's a perception out there that RCS is something very, very new. It isn't actually. The idea for it came up almost 15 years ago. It has been commercially available for a number of years, but now RCS is truly gaining traction. And my speakers will be giving some real concrete examples of countries and territories, use cases where RCS is seeing great success, and there's no reason why it can't be replicated elsewhere around the world. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce my speakers, starting off with Catherine Maguire from BT. Hi, Catherine.
Hi there, hi everyone, thank you for joining. It's really good to be here with panelists from across the world to discuss moving RCS forward, in particular the commercial models. Just to give you a bit of background on myself, I am the Future Messaging Product Manager at BT, and previous to that I worked in RCS within GSMA as Global Ecosystem Manager, rolling out the service globally. So it's a sector that I've been involved in for about 5 to 6 years, and as James said, we've seen a lot of traction in that time, moving it from what it was 15 years ago, primarily a person-to-person technology, to a real contender in the digital commerce space for business messaging.
Fantastic. Thank you, Catherine. Nice to have you with us. And next, I'd like to introduce Sylvia Ranusha from Infobip. Sylvia, take it away. You're on mute. You're doing my usual trick.
Yeah, they're mowing the lawn in front of my
typical
place, so I was trying to be muted. But yeah, thank you for handing it over to me. It's great to be here. It's a really interesting topic. So I do product partnerships in Infobip. We are a global communication platform for businesses where I work with partners like Google, Apple, and Viber on the rich messaging opportunity. So we really see that the rich features are basically powering conversational experiences. So a lot of opportunity there for our clients kind of to increase their communication and increase their customer satisfaction. So understanding the complexity of different business models out there is definitely key for us, and basically everybody who is in touch with the conversational experiences is key to leverage this massive opportunity that is presented.
Fantastic. Thank you, Sylvia. And we'll be hearing a lot more from you very, very soon. Next, I'd like to introduce Rami Riyad. Now, if there was one person who I would probably have to sue for copyright in terms of job title, it's this guy, because he's VP for the future of messaging. Who got there first, though? Was it MEF or was it IMI Mobile, now part of Cisco? who knows? But anyway, Rami, great that you could join us. Hi.
Thanks, James. We'll have to look into that, actually.
Yeah, who got there? Was it 2016, I think, MEF, or was it you?
Well, I think, like you said, I head up the future messaging team and now part of the WebEx organization, and we're looking at all channels related to how they integrate with CPaaS platforms and how our customers and partners can make use of these channels, specifically RCS that we're talking about today.
Fantastic. Great that you could join us. Next, I'd like to introduce you all to Surinder Anand. Surinder is the Chief Technology Officer and VP for Product Management with a company called dotgo, now part of Gupshup, the Gupshup family. Surinder, hi.
Hi. Hey, nice to be part of this forum. So dotgo has been, leading the efforts to, offer its RCS map and managed services to carriers to help launch and monetize RBM. And as part of this, one of the key challenges was to, you want to come up with the commercial model. And one of the first thing was, okay, how do we even define it? What is it? So we've been quite active along with, Sylvia and Rami and, James and the commercial MEF commercial model groups to define these different sessions, look at what's available out there and come up with a framework that can be used. So.
Fantastic. Thank you for joining us. Next, I'd like to introduce Thomas Welzel, who is Proposition Manager on a group level for messaging within Deutsche Telekom.
Hey, thanks, James, for having me here. To cut it short, everything I eat, drink, wear, breathe, smoke has an RCS and RBM rubber stamp on. So that's what I'm doing.
Okay, let's talk about SMS then. Come on. Thanks for joining us, Thomas. Great to have you with us. Next up is Bernd Heinen, who is Senior Product Manager, Corporate Messaging, Business Messaging with Telefonica Germany.
Thanks, James. Thanks for having me. Responsible commercially for RCS, say RBM on this end for the A2P business on Telefonica Germany, as well as the SMS part. So we can talk about both if you like.
Excellent.
And it's sometimes complementary. And so, happy to have you.
Fantastic. And last but by no means least, Mr. Andy Jones, who is the Director of Sales and Business Development with Industry Analysts. Many of you will be very familiar with their work. And I can't stop myself from quoting their stats. It's Mobile Squared, a proud MEF member. Hi.
Hi, James. Thank you very much. It's great to be part of this little forum today, talking about how we can get RCS pricing strategies up and running. And I'm going to kind of hopefully set the market, as you would expect from the leading market analysts, to give a little bit of food for thought for you guys as we go into the presentations on the way forward.
Fantastic. So just explain what's going to happen presentations-wise during this webinar. Andy's going to set the scene, tell us about the market, where RCS fits within that. Then we're going to have Sylvia, Surinder, and Rami coming along to talk about the work members have done within the RCS Commercial Models group. And we're going to have a presentation from Catherine looking at the UK market. And we're going to have a presentation from Bernd looking at the Germany market. But as I mentioned, we're going to be mentioning many different territories around the world. So Andy, take it away. Thank you.
So hopefully you can see my screen, everybody. I'm going to start on with Come On Down, the commercial model, The Price is Right. So a great title, really. And let's get really stuck into exploring the market. But as you would expect, any good presentation from any analyst should include the current state of the market. Many of you might have seen, this deck in Nick's presentation to how to make, the business messaging market $1 billion or $1 trillion industry. And these are some of the extracts. So, from where we sit right now, kind of the overall business messaging marketplace generated about just under $25 billion worth of revenue last year. As we all know, SMS dominates that marketplace. We started to see, rich business messaging. So we'll use the word rich, obviously in the context of all the rich channels, started to make some impact, 6% coming from that. And predominantly what we saw, from the rich business messaging channel is really adoption of kind of new use cases like customer care and conversational commerce. Obviously, the market share was dominated by WhatsApp. Within that, and RCS, about 0.4% of that revenue. So we've got RCS in a position here, and that's obviously what we're talking about today. So first of all, what we need to understand is that there is this myth, or there is this situation that basically, in order to use a channel, we believe that we need to offer ubiquitous coverage. And first of all, let's kind of put that myth to bed, really, because with a few exceptions, most of our customers sit in different demographics around the world and are using different messaging platforms. So while we have A2P SMS as a ubiquitous product within there, it's got the reach, it's got the pricing, it only delivers a fixed type of engagement. It can only do a certain amount of bits and pieces. And if we look at the rich business messaging users totally, about 65% of global users, predominantly all of these guys are getting a really, really rich experience within their P2P engagement, but they're not seeing the same followed through from a brand point of view. And, then when we start to talk about RCS, we kind of lower down in the penetration. But obviously, when we're talking to our customers about, understanding whether we should start to use rich business messaging channels, RCS and RBM, we really need to kind of quantify that in a little bit more detail. So I'm going to try and really set the scene and identify the problem that we've had. So SMS is a fairly straightforward product. It's an event-based product. It's got a price per message. The consumer can reply to the message, and we can go back to them. But conversation in SMS is fairly difficult. And then we have, the rich business messaging channels that can still do the events and per message pricing, but they offer so much more. And I'm not going to go into all the things that they offer, but the most important thing is we can enter into a session-based, a conversation with our customer. And really, this is where it starts to become very difficult to define a pricing model, because, a chat is very different in different environments. So we're having a chat now. We know there's 100 or so people on this call. It's going to last an hour, and that in effect is our session. And within that hour, we've got to get all of our questions done. We've got to analyze the content. When I speak to a member of my family, that would be a chat, and that might be, completely different. There are things that I don't want to talk about, things that they might want to talk about. So, conversations are really different. And in business, it is exactly the same. What we're trying to do is drive a successful outcome from a chat with a customer and a brand. So basically, we want them to buy a product or find an easy way to engage to use our services. And, saying that, for a customer care chat, it's going to be 37 minutes long, consist of 47 messages, is really, really difficult, because it's always going to be different. If I'm ordering something and I get a reminder and I change the reminder, I might change the reminder 3 or 4 days later after I've confirmed the order. So how do we build out sessions within that? And hopefully, when the guys are presenting later, you can start to see that this really comes into play, because some chats will take a few minutes, whereas some conversations might last over a couple of days. So if we understand that, we're kind of getting into the mentality that we can crack this engagement thing. But there are some other factors that come into play once we've addressed that. And first of all, this is based on consumer research that Mobile Squared have been doing since 2015. This is based on some of our latest consumer research. To make it even more difficult, we now understand that males and females of different ages like to receive messages at different times of day and different days of the week. Females prefer to receive messages at the weekend between 12 and 3. Males prefer to see them at a slightly different time. And the profiles across each of the market verticals are really different. So when we start to think about having a conversation with that brand, the first thing that we need to consider is we need to send the message to the customer when they're most likely to engage, because that message is at the top of their inbox. B, it's at a time we know they've allocated to deal with that, and C, we're likely to get a better, engagement and potential a path to purchase from doing that. So once we've cracked when we're going to, what a session looks like, we then really need to start to think about, who's our target audience? What do they look like? When do they prefer to be engaged? And then we can start to really, make an effective use of a campaign. So the other thing we understand as well, again from the consumer research, and this is based on SMS, is there are certain things in SMS, which is obviously limited to 160 characters, that consumers don't really value or they actually find completely not useful. And actually, these are things in conversational commerce, and particularly if we're looking to engage with a customer to buy a product, which are really, really important to differentiate. So as you can see from the little chart, we can see that, potentially, in the majority of cases across the age and gender demographic, people don't really like a link to a website within a message. A, because it's often not identified as a link to the brand. It's hidden under a different URL. B, because there's so much, so much spam within SMS. They don't necessarily trust it, and that kind of discourages people to click on that link, which maybe takes them to a fantastic promotion within the website. Now, within rich business messaging, that's a completely different kettle of fish, because A, we don't necessarily need to embed a link to be able to do a transaction with a customer, but B, when we're sending a message, predominantly it's from a verified brand, and we understand that the brand sending that message and all the information associated with that message is from that brand. So rather than clicking to a website to buy a pair of trainers, we can use the carousel that's delivered to select the trainers that we want, look and see if they're available in our size. We can purchase those trainers, and then we get a delivery day, and also at the same time we could fill in a bit of customer feedback to say we really like the experience. So this is what consumers are saying. So some things work really well in SMS. So let's say that your appointment's due today at 3:30. That's a good reminder. Most people find that useful. Links to download a brand a business app, not so useful. People have not got that trust in SMS, whereas in rich business messaging, we've got that trust. And if we do that, what we're going to start to see is a lot different engagement profiles from our customers. The other thing we know, and forgive me guys if you've seen this before, but from an SMS perspective, we can only deliver a certain type of treatment. It's not very conversational, it's clunky to go backwards and forwards. So we only tend to get a normal type of engagement experience. So we deliver a message, a percentage of people like open that message and move forward, a percentage of people really engage, and then a percentage of people actually end up purchasing. But from SMS, that's all we're going to ever be able to do. Whereas within the rich business messaging channels, and this would include some of the CPaaS channels as well, and certainly mobile apps and kind of web engagements, we have a completely different proportion of users. There's not, there's a percentage of people there that will only buy if they can do it from their mobile device, either through the web or through a messaging session. And there are a percentage of people that prefer to buy in that way. Now, if we give them an SMS experience, we're only going to be able to deliver that engagement rate. But if we give them a rich business messaging experience where we understand, that they will open, that more will open and more will engage, we can start to actually prove that it's not about the volume that you send, it's about targeting your audience at the right time with the right message on the right platform. So you can, in essence, send a lot less messages to achieve a lot higher engagement and return on investment. The other thing we know as well, again from the consumer research, is we know once that customer's decided that they're going to buy a product, we know how they're going to pay. So we know whether they prefer to pay via inputting credit card details into a web form, or whether they're going to use a card stored in their wallet, or whether they're going to enter their details, or they're going to use their direct carrier billing. So if we can crack the session description and the price for a session, even if it's based on different use cases, what we then can say is to our customers, well, actually, now we've got that. If we engage this time on this platform, we'll get this type of engagement rate. And also, if the content's geared towards what the people like, we're going to get a lot higher engagement. And also then we can start to make sure that when they do end up making a purchase, we present them with their preferred payment mechanisms. So that's kind of a little bit of the new research we've got. But let's just go back to the opportunity in terms of revenue. So at the moment there are 305 million registered businesses in the world, and we think through our market research that around 5% of these are using SMS, and predominantly they are in the large business space. We understand in the SOHO space there's a lot more engagement over the OTT channels, and they will never really move to SMS because there's a cost associated with it. But predominantly, this 5% of the market in SMS is generating 23.4 billion. It's quite a lot of money. If we were to just migrate half of that to rich business messaging and assume that the cost of message will be around double for having more of a conversational engagement with that customer, we push the revenue up to 35 billion. And that's quite a significant jump. And it's also something that's not fundamentally that unachievable, because when we're talking to the brands, we can explain the advantages. It might cost more, but it's going to deliver a lot more. And if we migrated that whole lot over, we would double that revenue. So, when we were talking at MWC about $1 trillion industry, we're kind of making some inroads into that. But let's just leave you on kind of one last scenario. If and obviously, this is more moving into the CPaaS environment, we start to get higher engagement with our customers and start to identify their CPaaS channels and maybe offer a blend of services in there. What we can start to do is we can start to move that business messaging marketplace from 5% to something like 30%. So we're going to go from 24 billion to 140 billion, and that is a significant jump. But even if we just do 5% of that with an RBM, we're going to generate 163 billion. So the opportunity not only drives revenue for us within the ecosystem, it's going to drive higher engagement from a customer perspective. So it's going to increase their revenues, increase their customer satisfaction. And as businesses move to CPaaS, you don't move from CPaaS to say, right, I'm going to go from SMS to email, because they're both simple technologies. They've got limited capability. If you've invested in an app, you're not going to invest in SMS potentially. But what you would do if you've invested in an app is you might think, actually, I need to encourage, a bit of rich communication in there. So I'm going to use RCS as an example, as a way of communicating. And eventually what we'll see is that app replacement will move, that app will be replaced by a messaging session, which will be A, easier for the brands to manage, and B, easier for the consumers to engage. So it makes complete sense. Now, at this point, we've got up to 163 billion, and I'm sure it's still 800 billion short of the $1 trillion industry. But if we get this right now and we work with our customers to show the benefits, once you see that migration of traditional email, SMS, kind of app and web traffic being then managed through a business messaging session, what we'll start to see is the opportunity for contextual advertising and digital marketing to move into that channel. And that in its own right starts to create a huge amount of revenue. So hopefully I've set it up nicely for my speakers to follow on from this. So I'm Andy Jones, Mobile Squared. If you'd like to discuss anything that we've showed, then please feel free to reach out to me. And I'm going to hand you back to James, I suppose, who's going to hand you over to Sylvia.
I will. Andy, thank you very much. And I think
my pleasure.
One thing I know that has been mentioned quite a lot is the whole area of there's such a huge headroom for growth across all of messaging. It's not about just which channel is going to take how much of the pie. It's messaging as a whole has so much space to grow. And when you look globally, customer support is a $1 trillion a year plus business. So
yes,
if messaging takes, and this is what this whole two-way rich messaging, particularly with the chatbots, is very, very useful for. We'll be coming to that and talking about that. And indeed, panelist speakers, you can see a question about the whole chatbot side of things as well, which we'll answer a bit later. but that's particularly great for the customer service type applications as well. So
I mean, I think
messaging...
we were on a call yesterday, I think, a MEF call, James, and it was, I think Bill from Cinch was saying that, you know, there is a move for interoperability between rich business messaging platforms to allow, you know, that reach to, rather than be to a closed user group, to be expanded out across multiple channels.
Fantastic.
And if that's the case, then that, you know, that is a huge opportunity for us. Anyway.
It is, Andy. Thank you. Next up, I'd like to hand over to Sylvia. And Sylvia was the primary instigator for the creation of the RCS commercial model subgroup, which sits within the Future of Messaging program with MEF. So Sylvia, take it away. The stage is yours.
Thank you, James. So just to confirm, if you can see my slides, I don't have a lot. I have
big
a
thing
few,
starters,
but...
BIP ideas. Yeah, we can see.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, looking back, it started almost a year and a half ago. So
Sylvia, we see probably a different thing, not the slide.
Not your presentation. There we go. There we go.
Oh,
yeah.
Well, luckily, I don't have any confidential information on my desktop for sure.
There we go.
But okay, let me just switch my camera here so I can see you here. Okay, well, yeah, it started a year and a half ago. So RCS was just kind of ramping up and WhatsApp was really going strong, pushing the whole conversational space forward. So we really feel that like these rich features are not only powering the conversational experiences, but they're expanding this pool of use cases that our brands can then use to increase their customer satisfaction. So we see definitely the industry moving in that direction, and that is why we Infobip as a company, we are investing a lot of resources to build solutions to help our clients kind of be more conversational, you know, create channel orchestration tools, bot building, contact center in the cloud. So we're really trying to listen to the market and see what the clients might need. So conversational is definitely in the middle of all that. WhatsApp really helped move things along when they started. And then RCS came on board, and with their features, the conversational piece was crucial to understand. What is more challenging with RCS, and that is why I actually reached out to Dario a year and a half ago, is that the situation is more fragmented. With WhatsApp, we have one provider, which is WhatsApp, and they came up with a business model that would support their sessions. So they kind of introduced it gently to the market, and it was a good thing because up until that point, there were no session models out there. So it was definitely something new for the industry, for the clients, for the providers, for everybody included who is working in messaging. And then with RCS, we started to kind of when it was taking off, we started to receive different, like various models coming from different markets and different carriers. And everybody kind of had their own vision what a session means for them, which is, I mean, in generally okay. I'm not going into, I'm not trying to speak in direction of what model is the best or endorse any model. But for me, it was just important to understand these different models that are being communicated towards us from our carrier partners, and then communicate the same to the brands. So they could kind of understand what it is and be able to do the budgeting and calculate the cost. So definitely, if I could point out three different challenges that I personally had at that moment working on rich messaging, was variety of conversational business model out there, which were defined in different ways. It was difficult for me personally to understand what they meant and then convey the same to our brands. And last but not the least, it is really a massive task to integrate these different models into the billing systems. And that's why we were really trying to, before developing anything, we were really trying to understand them. So that was kind of the rationale behind it, and why we thought it was important to kick off this challenging, let's call it like that, challenging topic. But I think it will really be rewarding in the long run when we manage to come up with some, like, say, framework to be on the same page. So I don't know, maybe I can hand over to Rami or Surinder, maybe to share their view, because they were really, really active from the very start on in the working group, contributing a lot to the initiative. So guys.
Surinder, if you want to start.
Sure. I'll touch upon, one point, from a technology point of view. You have, I think one of the challenges from a, implementation perspective, from, to be able to do billing for session with normal per message billing, it's kind of straightforward. You send a message, you know what the charge is, and kind of you move along. With sessions, it's almost like you got to build a state machine. You got to keep track where you are, whether a session is about to start, or you're in a session or not, when it is ending. And imagine that, as a provider, if I have to support multiple such session models, and each one of is defined like independent of each other. There's no structure, no framework. You end up having like 2, 3, 5 different implementation, which is a challenge both for an aggregator, a CPaaS, or also for a carrier who wants to maybe try one model and maybe wants to change it. So putting a structure in place that that we've been able to achieve helps from that point of view as well. So and in addition to being able to really understand what the models are, it really would be a great help to implement this in a platform. Yeah,
I think everybody brings up some really good points, and we've been trying out RCS for a while now, and some of the observations that we've seen is pricing models to be defined are really important, because it just sets the stage for everybody to be on the same level, help explain it to brands. But defining the model doesn't necessarily mean the introduction of the price right away. Brands are still trying to explore, and enterprises are still trying to explore the channels. And we did talk to that on an operator session that was coordinated by the MEF recently here in the US, where until the market has enough adoption, and Andy, to your point, not 100%, but at least when there's enough adoption in the market for the channel, then we can start introducing actual pricing. We've seen successful use cases of that, like in Mexico. I believe Germany are also looking at that. So there are where the penetration, where all the operators have launched, the number of users are growing in that market. Then we can start introducing pricing. But now we need that introductory period where we need to excite brands about the channels. We need them to use it, play around with it, learn. And we've taken a data-driven approach to get all the information from the enterprises that we work with and try to model sessions. And the common theme that we've seen is that almost everybody is playing in the same time frame based on just the use cases that were launched right now. If you look at calendar day, everybody's within that time frame. There are not one model fits all markets, but you also see that you have a session, but you also have messages that are not responded to by users. So those need some sort of like an event charge or per message fee. And then the majority of the use cases that we've seen so far were all concluded in under 4 hours. So when a lot of discussions we go through with some of the operators, they're like, is it 24 hours is too much, too little? Do we do 8, 4, 6? At the beginning, with the use cases that are currently in market, it doesn't make a big impact. So that will evolve as new use cases start using the channel, and then we see more interactions and more dynamic chatbots evolve, and more different use cases basically than what's available today. Then the pricing model will eventually evolve. And I'm not saying the model should cover all the possibilities and be flexible enough to expand to absorb some of these new use cases that show up. But for now, just start simple. Put something together as a group of operators in your market. I'm not alluding that you work together on that, but put something that is easy to understand from a market perspective, satisfies the majority of the requirements now, with an introductory period to say, brands, we're inviting you, come try to the channel. We'll model your pricing as we go along, and we'll give you estimates of what it would look like. And here's our date we plan to start on charging, whether it's 6 months, 9 months out, whatever that period may be, depending on each market. We'll create that buzz in the market to get the enterprises more excited about the channel.
Yeah, great points. I completely agree with both of you. We definitely need a good business model match to kind of support the conversational push that is happening at the moment. So maybe I can then proceed by sharing just a few. These are only 3. There are more out there, but just to kind of illustrate what are we dealing with here. So usually when RCS is rolling out on a new market, there is a typical like per message price, but there is also something that would support the conversational cases. Usually this is called a session model or a conversational model. And to mention a few, to illustrate how broad the variety of it is, we can mention like a session starts when either user or brand respond within 8 hours. And for example, session duration can be 2 hours. So this is just to illustrate. These parameters, meaning session duration or the response window, can be tweaked, but these are the parameters we usually see being used when new models are communicated. It can be unlimited messages within the 24 hours from the second user message after receiving the first brand message, and response time window to start the session is 24 hours. If this seems difficult to understand while I'm reading it, it only illustrates the problem actually more, and it increases the need to kind of structure it a bit in a way that when I put it on the slide, the audience of 100 participants here, if they look at it, they should immediately know what it is. So if this is too complicated to understand right off the bat, this is actually good. It actually illustrates the problem. And then for the last model, maybe 4 or more brand messages within the 4-hour time frame is considered a session, which starts with the first brand message. So as you can see, I'm deliberately trying to portray it as is, not trying to simplify it at this point. So that was the challenge, kind of different models out there. We're trying to communicate to a variety of different stakeholders. What does it actually mean? So what we needed at that point, what kind of presented itself as some favorable solution, is to define a framework, some simple, easy to understand parameters that are shared among different sessions that could help us describe basically any session out there. So any session that is thrown our way can be used, can use the parameters that we define and be easily understandable. So we wanted also not only to define the parameters, but to use them to illustrate real-life examples of different models out there, meaning like show them in action. And James already mentioned it, but I always think we need to stress it again and again. Our goal is to understand and not endorse a particular model. So on that note, we did come up with some basic set of parameters, which can help us then to define any session out there. Some are more intuitive, others need more explanation. I can go briefly through them to explain them, and then Surinder, maybe you can take over and then use these parameters to describe different models out there and show the message flow, how they look like, really illustrated in a graphical and nice way. So I can start with some simpler ones that are easy to understand, like an A2P message or P2A message. I believe everybody on the call here knows what that is. It is kind of like a message from a brand to a user, which is an A2P message, and vice versa, P2A message, a message from a user to the brand. A session, it's kind of like a newer term related to the conversational paradigm, and it means like a group of messages put together as a single charging unit. So it's more than one message in a session for sure. A2P single message and P2A single message, meaning messages that are not part of a session, single, only one message, pretty self-explanatory. I don't know why I went into more depth with that one. And then we go in the second column. Here, a situation becomes more complicated. Initial message is kind of the one that would that comes as an announcement of the session. So in order to trigger a session with the trigger message, and you can see it here as a next term, certain terms need to be fulfilled. So depending on how messages play out, the session either starts or doesn't. Surinder can really explain that in more detail on the next slide. Also related to the trigger event is basically the one that is starting the session. There is a certain period of time where we are waiting for this trigger window to happen after the initial message, where the session can then start. You have seen it on a previous example. If the response comes in the next 2 hours, we can trigger a session. Also, session has a start time and a duration. These two are pretty self-explanatory. And we did introduce a term which is called a lookback count, which is something I would say from all of these parameters most difficult to understand, but I would say it enables us to really flexible define pretty much any session out there, which means that sometimes when a session starts, it looks for a certain number of messages in the past. We have seen a few models out there, and these messages are then grouped together in one big session. So by using this 9 terms, we can really define any session out there. And I will hand over now to Surinder to use the parameters to show it in action, show it how it works. And maybe we can start with the session start time and show the message flow for that one.
Thanks, Sylvia. So as you saw, those 3 examples of, the kind of sessions that were out there. And when we started analyzing, we realized that very broadly, there are 2 kind of sessions. One that are defined in terms of an A2P message followed by a P2A response, or in some cases, it could be a P2A message followed by an A2P response. So it's like, a message followed by a response. But then there were others like, the 4th message triggers a session, or the 2nd response triggers a session. So that's where we said we really need to, unify these different concepts. Otherwise, we're really thinking of completely 2 different category of sessions. And that's where we came up with this notion of there is for all of these, there's a trigger event. And at that time, we know that a session has started. And that trigger typically follows an initial event. And I'll give you some cases where the initial message itself could be a trigger, but those are kind of, like boundary cases. But you will have an initial message, and then there is a trigger event that would, define that, okay, the session has started. So I'll give you an example where the initial message, one definition which is based on response is that the initial message is any A to P message, and any P to A response within the trigger window, let's say 24 hours, starts the session. So that's so the P2A response is a trigger event. And this is where the next concept comes in. Once the session is triggered, does the session start from the trigger event, or does it start from the initial event? And in most session definitions where they're defined based on response, the session starts from the trigger event, from the response time. So this is basically what this illustrates, that you have an initial message. There could be more messages that could come in before the trigger happens. And once the trigger event happens, the session starts. And then the session lasts for a certain period. And we'll talk about cases where the session duration itself could be n number of hours, like 24 hours or 8 hours, or we could have the session duration as end of a calendar day, etc. So that's kind of the first example where the session is starting from the trigger event. Can you move to the next slide?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So this is the the variation where we said, like, again, it's the same concept. You have an initial message, potentially more messages. You have the trigger event, and now I want my session to start from the initial message. By defining these common parameters, we've now just said, okay, these two, while they look very different in the beginning, now we've unified them. Now we said, okay, most of this is common. There's one configuration parameter you need to change, is to say, look, when does the session start? You got to set that flag as, does the session start from the trigger event, or does the session start from the initial event? So we've been able to unify these two different kind of sessions into one definition. Okay, let's go to the next one. Yeah, the look back count. So this is a, as Sylvia said, this is kind of a little bit more complex and a new concept that we had to bring in, and this is really to take care of the sessions where the session starts from the trigger event. So let's take the case where you're defining what we call as an A to P conversation, and the definition is that the brand is sending a message, an A to P message, and any response within, say, 24 hours starts the session. The question now is that the session is starting from this response, the P2A response. Now, in the session, are any of these A to P messages included or not is what defines the look back count. And that one parameter helps us kind of specify that, because there are different definitions out there. So this is a case where look back count is 0, which means that only these messages starting from the P2A response are part of the session. And these A to P messages that were sent before will each be charged as A to P single messages. And that's why we had that A to P single message as a different concept, messages that are not part of the sessions that need to be charged separately. The next slide. This illustrates where you want to set look back count equal to 1, which is to say, look, hey, I'm not going to have all of those A to P messages in the last 24 hours as part of the session, but I'll at least take the last A to P message to which the user respond as part of the session, even though the 24-hour session starts from the P2A response, but I'll at least include this for the purpose of charging as part of the session. So that's look back count 1. And look back count all is where you're saying, look, okay, all the messages within the trigger window are part of the session. again, the idea here is, as we said, it is not to really at this, we're not kind of endorsing any model, but a framework that allows us to kind of combine all of these concepts into one unified definition, so that all the different kind of sessions that we were seeing, we are able to define in these common terms. Next. So the third concept that we did here was that you can have a session. The session itself could be n hours, like 24 hours or 8 hours, and here I'm showing it in the with the example of that initial message, and typically this happens where we have an example where the fourth A2P message starts the session. And in those cases, we've seen that the session start time is then the initial message. So this is one concept that this covers. And then the session is 24 hours from the initial message. The next slide. Now we can have a variation of that where you say, look, the session is starting from the initial message, but it is not n number of hours, it's not 24 hours or 8 hours, but it's really end of that calendar day. So this basically takes care of some of the models out there where a session ends at the end of the calendar day. So as I said, while there are differences in all of these models, by defining these few different concepts, we're able to unify them so it's easier to understand. And it's also a great help if somebody is trying to implement and actually test it. So okay, I think that's the last slide, right?
It is.
Yeah.
Surinder,
Okay.
I'm going to have to cut you off in your prime because we only have 10 minutes to go.
Yeah, I'm done. Yeah.
We've used 50 minutes up, and
Okay.
I'm very, very keen to move to some real ultra practical examples, because it's okay for a provider to say, hey, this is good, this is what's happening in country. But if you hear it actually from the horse's mouth themselves, in this term, it's the mobile operators, because of course they ultimately own the last mile to us subscribers. So I'd like to introduce Catherine Maguire from BTEE. Catherine, as you introduce yourself, you've been working in this RCS domain for a very long time. If you could just tell the audience what's been going on in the UK with regards to RCS. You're on mute at the moment.
I was too busy sharing the slides. Don't
worry.
Can you see my slides okay?
Okay.
Yeah. So it's been really interesting to hear the perspectives so far on the call, and there's so much that I agree with, and especially surrounding what Sylvie and Rami were saying around, that we need to get this out and sort of trial it. And there, of course, there's going to be a margin for error with some of the commercial models, and there's always going to be cases that are less applicable to each use case, in terms of session length and everything they described. But what's important is to have an aligned commercial model in country. And that's something that we've really been working on in the UK market. We've taken the feedback of aggregators on board. We had a session with them, I would say, about 7 months ago now. And that's basically what we've been working on doing for the last 6 months. And I think I can probably say at this point, we have aligned on session length and what constitutes a single message, what constitutes an A2P session, what constitutes a P2A session. So I'll just dive into that in a moment. But first of all, I just wanted to talk about where we are in the actual, where we are for EEBT and across the UK market for RCS at the moment. So it's become a real contender in the space, in the digital commerce space. And I think that sort of touches on what Andy said earlier regarding how we can capitalize on SMS spend as it is for business messaging by using things like RCS or RBM technology, even if a fraction of it moves. When we now have 22% of smartphones in the UK RCS enabled, I think when I was working in this space about 3-4 years ago, maybe when I was at GSMA, that a lot of the brands said, come back to us when you've got over 20% coverage in the UK market, and that's when we will really see RCS as a contender for the digital commerce space and something that we can really work with. And we have about 16 million users in the UK across all MNOs and 4.3 million users in the UK on EEBT's network. But talking about what we've been doing, so we've been working together under the Watchful Eye of the GSMA since September to sort of move the market forward. And one of the prime things that we've been doing in the UK market, along with my colleagues in Telefonica, Vodafone and Three, is align on commercial models. And this is, again, as I said, taking the feedback on board, and we're just about to publish. And I think it probably, yeah, well, you know, we're at the very final stages, and we've set about a certain session length that will cover all operators. And I think this sort of draws on what Sylvia is saying, that we can't, it's very, very hard to sell out to a brand if there's a lot of disparate different commercial models in country. And we've learned this, that the countries where RCS has had most success, the commercial models have been aligned, and brands and their aggregator partners have been able to really understand and provide a price based on that for an RCS campaign and explain how it will be charged in using various sessions. So we will be publishing very shortly. We're just finalising this within EEBT. We've actually agreed the commercial model across the operators, but I think I probably need to wait and get approval from my colleagues in the other MNOs to announce it on this call. But as aggregator partners, it will be out very, very soon. So that we hope that this will show the market how behind RCS we are. We're also drawn on the fact that, you know, WhatsApp have come out with a specific model. It's a real contender in the market for a lot of that potential RBM traffic, and we need to have a model that will be a strong contender to that and will be easy for our partners to understand. And just to draw on something else that we're doing in the UK market, I know we haven't got very much time left, but just another thing that our aggregator partners had come back in the UK and said was that we had too convoluted an onboarding process, and there was disparate SLRs for brand onboarding. So we've again streamlined that process and ensured that it's as simplified as it possibly can be, in that a brand or aggregator doesn't have to give the same steps into each MNO to onboard a campaign, and they can do it more quickly by using a universal onboarding form for all 4 MNOs in the UK.
Fantastic.
And we're also
Catherine, thank you.
Yeah.
We've only got 5 minutes. It's amazing how
I
time
was trying to
flies.
rush through that because I know there's very little time, but really
Go on.
my key message is that we totally, you know, see how these commercial models have to be aligned in country, and that's basically what we're trying to achieve in the UK market. And it's really good to see different thinking behind different commercial models from that have come out of this group, and we've definitely drawn on that to bring it to life in the UK market. Fantastic.
Catherine, thank you. And I'd like our colleagues from Germany, so Bernd Heinen from Telefonica and Thomas Welzer from Deutsche Telekom, to ultimately bring this webinar to a close with a snapshot of what's been going on in Germany. Bernd, over to you, and Thomas.
Thank you. Yeah, I will jump in, try to keep it short with taking see the watch. In Germany, we have, I mean, it's a bit what Catherine showed for the UK, the same maths here. We have around 50% of the all market reachable for RCS. When we take a look on the Android base, it's nearly 70% that you can reach in Germany with RBM messages. So quite as good as probably WhatsApp as the main competitor on the OTT side, which has nearly 50 million accounts in the addressable market. And I think from this perspective, it's quite nice try for every brand to use RBM, because you can win a lot, as we see in our internal cases as well. You can, you know, increase your upselling rates, you can increase the opening and delivery rates, etc., etc. So a lot of numbers that we've seen in the first campaigns as well as in the internal use. When I take a look on the second slide, from the business model perspective, what are we offering in Germany? And these are all aligned models over these 3 carriers. Also, the session times is now, since the beginning of the year, aligned to 24 hours. We have the standard pricing model, single end sessions on the top, event only on the top right. So if you want to avoid session that they can happen, then you can do so. We have zero-rated bots like WHO, for example, for the pandemic information. And we have active user-based pricing models now available for newsletter, informational services, campaigns, etc. And when I take a look on the listeners in our webinar here, I've seen 20% drops when we explained the different models, and maybe this is a bit, similar to other talks that you have outside. If it becomes complex, you lose a lot of interest there. So I think it's key to keep it as simple as possible for everyone out there. That we can get.
Ben, can I just hand over to Thomas for closing remarks? Please. I appreciate, Thomas. Thank you for your patience the whole webinar.
Okay,
but you get to close this basically.
I will keep it short with just one sentence. I think it doesn't really matter which model you finally agree on that you apply for a certain market. What really matters is that you agree on a model, because that takes complexity off our services, off our product. It makes it easier for our customers, and you won't be successful if you make it more complicated than our competitors in this area do.
There we go.
As that.
To Thomas, that is short, concise, and absolutely true. Very, very simply, if we all rock up to an enterprise client, they ask us, James, how much is an SMS? We can tell them. How much is a voice call? We can tell them. But if we were to answer, were we talking about RCS? It depends. That's your answer. So everything, the work that's been done by the carriers in Germany, by the carriers in the UK, and their model will become known very, very soon. Catherine, thank you for that. Shows that this alignment is key. So I'd like to thank all my panelists today. We could have really needed 2 hours to do this topic justice. So apologies, I know it has been not very even. I always try to make sure my panelists get to a roughly even go at speaking, but it's been impossible this time round. So thank you very much to Sylvia Anusha from Infobip, Surinder from dotgo, Gupshup, much appreciated, Rami Riyad from Cisco IMI Mobile, Catherine, as I mentioned, BTEE, Andy Jones, Mobile Square, Thomas Welzer from Deutsche Telekom, and Bernd Heinen from Telefonica Deutschland. So thank you very much indeed. All of you viewers, thank you very much for joining us. This recording will be available in a few days' time. I have to write a blog post first and need a quote from my speakers. I've received a few of them already. So I'll be getting those together. I know, good boy, Andy. Thank you. And yeah, all great. So this blog post will be out with the recording, and when that comes out, please feel free to share it far and wide. And finally, the working group, the RCS Commercial subgroup, is doing a great job, that is, of putting together an educational document about this whole area. So watch out for that coming out in the next couple of months as well. So that's it. Over and out. James Williams, MEF. It's been another Thursday webinar. Thank you very much for listening and watching. All the best. Bye.
Bye.